Hello and welcome back to the Commander Lurpack YouTube channel. In today's video I'll be making a ruined building for my Warhammer 40k city boards. Hope you enjoy the video. The best place to start with any terrain build is a sketch. This enables you to put on paper and visualise ideas in your head. Sometimes problems with your design become more obvious when displayed physically than in your imagination. I wanted two hab block buildings connected by a ruined walkway to be the main focal point of my next board section. Once happy with your rough idea, I find it useful to draw out the footprint of the terrain onto the board section. The board section is a 2 foot by 2 foot MDF sheet, which is 1.2 centimeters thick and will provide a strong base for the terrain. Using the footprint as a guide, I measure out the length of the buildings onto 1 centimeter thick foam board. I then cut the board to size with a hobby knife. This will form the basic shapes of the building fronts and sides. Now I need to come up with a template for the spacings of the windows. I decided to make the windows 4 centimeters by 3 centimeters and space them 2 centimeters apart. I decided to have a 6 centimeter spacing between floors to give enough space for larger miniatures to fit in between the floors. Again, always have a miniature for scale. Happy with my template, I begin marking it out onto the foam board with a pencil. The indentation of the pencil will provide a great guide for cutting with the hobby knife, as the blade naturally follows the path of the indentation. With the hobby knife, you carefully cut out the window sections, trying to get clean cuts as possible, but any bad cuts can be hidden with battle damage later. I do this for the 2 building fronts and the 4 building sides. So I just finished cutting out all the windows from the wall sections. You'll have a big pile of the window cutouts. Keep these because these are great for creating all the rubble, which is going to go around the base of the buildings, and that way you don't waste any foam. And then with these offcuts, I'm going to be creating the bridge that's going to go in between the 2 buildings, as you can see on my rather pitiful sketch. I've thought while I've been cutting out these windows for countless hours, that I might cut this board section in half down the middle, so that it can be split into 2 different board sections for gaming purposes, or played as one section, so you've got a bit more usability out of it. And I thought I'd actually cut this one in half before I finished the board, unlike my previous board where it all went to pot. Cue clip.
This is the work!
Now measure out the floor sections for the 2 buildings. The first floor will be a larger floor and the second floor narrower, to allow for easier access to place miniatures upon the first floor underneath. It is always important when designing a board to keep usability for wargaming in mind. Using Yoo-Hoo glue, which I view as Mod Podge's sidekick, I glue the buildings together. I use Yoo-hoo glue as it firstly is very cheap, which is great, and secondly it melts the two pieces of foam together in a chemical reaction, forming a strong bond.
Yes, science! Okay.
Using Yoo-hoo again, I glued the buildings to the board sections. I again checked the scale of everything as I go with the help of a Lehman Russ. So with all your leftover bits of foam that will be cut out from the window sections, you can use them to make chunks of rubble to go around the base of the building and also spread out across the floors of the building to give the idea that it's ruined and fallen in on itself. To do this, I am going to use a hobby knife. So with your hobby knife, you just want to start cutting these square chunks into more believable rubble shapes and making the edges more irregular. And you can just wiggle the hobby knife to create these cracks and indents that would appear in any rubble that's fallen from the building. Then you got your first chunk of rubble. So the buildings are dry and they're pretty sturdy now, stuck onto the board. I've made the street a little bit wider than what I first intended so that I can fit large tanks like Bane blades down and potentially even two Lehman Russes side by side can squeeze down there. You can see the reason why I've cut the board in half, because it enables me to have multiple layouts for the board. Once I've ruined the building up, I could potentially have it as one ruined building, or I can have it as two separate buildings next to each other. And this just gives multiple layouts for the board, keeps it interesting. So now I'm gonna go on to ruining the buildings and then adding the rubble. So got me offcut of foam, which I'm gonna add in to create a walkway between the two buildings, like what I have drawn in my little picture. So I'm gonna attach it and then destroy the middle and have it as rubble down in the street. So first of all, I need to cut some doorways. How's it? Yeah. Looks like a door, doesn't it? So I've neatened up the bridge section and cut two walls for the little walkway, and I'm going to stick those on again using Yoo-hoo. I'm going to start ruining the buildings by starting to cut away chunks of it with a hobby knife. You might be thinking, wouldn't it be easier to cut them already ruined when you're designing them?
Correct!
However, I find it creates a lot more realistic looking damage if you build it as an intact building and then cut away parts of it as battle damage. Each to their own. And all of a sudden, you've got ruined profile of a building as opposed to the intact profile of the building. I think it makes a lot of difference. I'm going to start roughing up the edges of the cut that I've made to make it a bit more blended between the hard line, the cut, and the building. You can start to make cracks by digging the knife in and wiggling it. This opens up the foam. It creates a realistic looking crack texture. Then you can very lightly carve in some smaller cracks coming off of the main one. You can add as many or as little of these cracks as you want, depending on how bad a state you want your building to be in. Another technique you can do is to get the knife, dig it in, and then spin it round. This is great for creating bullet holes, and then you just do cracks coming off of this divot, and it looks like an impact has been made in the building by some sort of bolter or tank round. Well, I suppose a tank round might be bigger. And you can do these in smaller size for small arms fire, and just add damage where you think things would start to crack along weaknesses such as window frames and where there's been a lot of damage. And you want to do this all over the building to create a damaged look. As you're cutting away chunks of the building, you might want to have them hanging off the building and have them attached by rebar. So I've cut off this chunk and I'm going to ruin it up the same as this side, but have it sort of hanging off of the building. I'm going to make the rebar out of hairpins and literally stick it into the foam on each side of the ruined bit, and that will be what supports this entire bit. But you can get some really cool effects, and you can have large chunks of building like this, or you can just have little bits of rubble just hanging off. But this is why it's handy to have an intact building, because this chunk of building that will be hanging off will look perfectly like the chunk of building that's supposed to be falling down. So I've roughed up both sides of the building that I want to hang. This bit's broken off, but that's fine because we can attach that by rebar as well. So all of this is going to be hanging like that on the exposed rebar. So let's make some rebar. So I'm going to use these bobby hair pins to make the rebar. All you need to do is get your hairpin, get a pair of metal cutting pliers, there we go, and simply snip it in half, like so, and then you've got 2 bits of rebar. Right, with your piece of hairpin, you want to stick it into the foam of the building where you're going to attach the piece of building that's going to be hanging off. Is that alright? Yeah. Like so. So after a lot of fiddling about, you can see the rebar I have added, which is holding this chunk of building. Onto it. I think this adds a really realistic look. I then start to chip away and ruin the floor sections, again adding some rebar detailing by having a floor section hanging. Once the building is finished being ruined, I attach the walkway I made earlier. I've cut it in half and ruined it as I wanted in my sketch. I stick hairpins into the bridge and use them to pin the bridge with Yoo-hoo glue to the building. I then set about ruining the other building. Using hairpins and Yoo-hoo glue again, I attach the other half of the bridge to the second building, making sure the walkways match up nicely. So now that I've finished ruining the building and adding all the cracks and damage, it's time to add all of the rubble that was cut out earlier, and this will help hide the flat surfaces of the floors and help to blend the building into the base. So what I'm going to do is these big sections which I've cut out from the building is use that to build some height on the bottom of the base, and then cover them with the smaller pieces of rubble, and this will save you cutting more detailed cracks and stuff in rubble, because that's really not very fun. To do this, I'm going to use some tacky glue. Seems to do the job. So I have added all the rubble around the edge of the boards and also onto the floor sections. As you can see, this just breaks up the flat texture and adds a bit more detail. I haven't gone too mad with the rubble because I plan on adding some mud later on, so any of the bare patches will have mud showing. Now on to the next building. Let's see what the board section looks like so far. That's all I had time for in today's video. I will be continuing the build in the next video, where I'll be adding some extra details to the building and hopefully getting some paint on it. If you enjoyed the video, then check back in 2 weeks on Sunday when I'll be posting my next video. And I'll catch you later.